того, щоб починати стрімити. І я вітаю вас вже другий раз
So, dear
на
participants, let's start.
презентації
So, as far
нашого
as I believe,
другого моніторингу того, що відбувається
recording is
в
on,
країні
and we are
із
welcoming
відбудовою.
you on our
Ми
second monitor
моніторимо, на що
concerning what's going on
витрачаються
in Ukraine,
кошти,
concerning
що відбудовується,
recovery and rebuilding.
яке
We are
законодавство,
monitoring
як воно
what money is
міняється у
spent
сфері,
on, what is
ну
being
і багато
rebuilt, what is the
інших речей.
legislation, how it is changing in the
У
sphere,
жовтні у
and
нас
lots of other
спецтема,
things.
ну,
In
власне, як у половини країни, це
October,
бюджет
our special
2024.
topic, as in half of the country, is
Цей
Budget
моніторинг відбувається в рамках
2024.
проєкту
This
«Контроль
monitoring
бюджету
is taking
відновлення».
place in the
Він
framework
фінансується
of the
Європейським
project
Союзом.
control on
Реалізують його
these
Центр економічної
expenses on the
стратегії, який
recovery. It is
представляю я, Марія
implemented by
Репко,
the Center for Economic
Інститут
Strategy,
економічних досліджень та
represented by
політичних
me, Maria
консультацій
Repko,
і
Institute of
компанія
Economic
технології прогресу.
Research and
Всі
Political
учасники проєкту є
Consultation,
членами
and
коаліції РАЙС.
all of the participants
Технічні питання
are
сьогоднішнього
members of
вебінару
Coalition
ви можете
Rise.
залишати
Technical
питання
issues,
в
technical
коментарях
questions
в розділі
can
Q&A
be
в
in
чаті, в
Q&A,
коментарях маю на
Q
увазі
and answer tab in Facebook
чи в
or
Q&A або чаті в
here
Zoom.
in
На
Zoom.
нижній панелі Zoom
And
тут
on the
переклад.
lower
If
panel,
you
we
want
have
to switch to
interpretation
English, you can
working.
choose the English language in the translation panel. І окремо для наших україномовних панелістів, а також
And
я
separately
думаю,
for
що
our
для англомовного
Ukrainian-speaking
панеліста також,
panelists, and as well
я
as
хочу
for
нагадати, що в
English-speaking
нас працює
panelists,
синхронні перекладачі, тому
I would like
прошу
to
говорити не
remind you that
дуже
we have
швидко,
simultaneous
бо для учасників трошки з вами
interpreter
не
working.
встигають.
So please do
Сьогодні з
not
нами буде
speak very fast,
Олександра
because very
Привіз,
often
перший
they are
експерт
just not
Інституту
able
економічних
to
досліджень та
catch up
політичних
with you. Today we
консультацій,
also
а
have
також дві мої
participants of
колеги з
economic
ЦЕСу, Марія
research with
Привіз та
us, and
Олександр
our
Kobernik,
two
які
colleagues from
поділяться
Center for
аналізом
Economic
українського
Strategy,
та
and
світового
they will
досвіду
share with
на
us
базі
analysis of
інтерв'ю, які
Ukrainian
вони
and
провели
world
з
experience
дійсно
on the
видатними
basis of
холдерами. Я
that
думаю, що
research
хтось
and
із
interviews they
тих,
have
кого
conducted with many
співзвучать
different
розмовляємо, може
stakeholders.
нас
And I
зараз
believe that
навіть слухає.
somebody
Також
maybe
у
is
нас сьогодні
now
спеціальний
listening
гість,
to
це Хюг
us.
Мінгарелі,
And now
колишній
we have
посол
also
ЄС в Україні
Hugues
в
Mingareli, our special
2016-2019
guest,
роках. Він
ex-ambassador
був
to
директором
the EU
Європейського
to
агентства
Ukraine,
з
and he also
реконструкції на
used to be the
Балканах
director of
в
European Agency and Reconstruction on Balkans
99-2002
in
році і працював на проєктах з
1990-2002.
Чорногорія,
And
Сербія,
he was
Косово.
working
Там
on reconstruction on
досить
Montenegro,
складний був
Serbia,
регіон, і в
Kosovo.
нього
It was pretty
багатий
difficult
досвід,
region,
яким
and
він
he has lots
хотів
of
би почав
experience and very
сьогодні
rich
на
experience. He
панелі
promised
поділитися.
to share it
Отже,
today
ми
with us.
відкриваємо, і
So we
я
are
прошу почати з,
starting our panel,
власне,
and I would
другого
like
нашого моніторингу
to
відбудови та
ask you to start
відновлення України.
from our
Представить його
second
Олександр
monitoring of
Betliy, старший
Ukraine
експерт
reconstruction and
Інституту економічних
recovery. It will
досліджень
be
та
represented
політичних
by
консультацій. Будь
Oleksandra
ласка,
Betliy,
Саша,
senior
прошу тебе.
senior consultant of Institute of Economic Research and Political Consultations. Yes, hello, dear colleagues. To speak faster, to speak slower, that's probably was remarked for me, because it was a problem previous time. It's our second monitoring. I hope that you can see it on the screen and it is obvious. I would like immediately to tell you that we will not going to show you all the slides today. This it will be on our resources. This presentation will be there on Facebook and on our website, so you can have a look at that, because there is a little bit more of information that what we're going to talk about today. So, of course, were lots of facts that we have discovered, but we decided to talk about the main changes. The first one is draft law number 10063. It is the citizens will be entitled to compensation for the repair of the residential property damaged by the aggressor. It is very important, because before that some citizens could not wait for this compensation, and they already made those repairs themselves, and now they can get compensated. It is very big positive. It was approved, but not signed. Unfortunately, another very important document, it is the methodological recommendations, which was developed by the Recovery Agency. It will help in procurement of works and services related to the reconstruction of civilian infrastructure, because not all communities have opportunities to have great procedures, and it will help them. We were expecting for very important prioritization methodology order from the Ministry of Reconstruction and Development. Unfortunately, we haven't received it yet. Maybe it has not been made public, but this methodology is extremely important for giving money from the Foundation of Liquidation. And we will be talking about this a little bit as well today. From very important things. Unfortunately, we now need more money for the recovery and rebuilding. We remember that the World Bank calculated one number for February, and we see that even in this last few months, it has raised significantly according to the Kyiv School of Economy. So it's plus, as of September the 1st, 2023, this is $0.7 billion, but it is without Kakhovka Dam. So yesterday it was that only this Kakhovka Dam is $15 billion. So we need even bigger financing for recovery. The main source is for the recovery, and but not single one. It's the fund for the elimination of the consequences. The information of the fund is published on the website of the Ministry of Recovery, but there has been 3 meetings already of interagency working group. The information about this third working group that has been conducted, unfortunately, it is not fully available, so it is difficult to evaluate what money was spent on, but we know that only 50% were spent on prioritization. Everything else went to those objects which were not prioritized, but here we need to mention one but. As I have mentioned earlier, methodologies of prioritization are not yet improved. So far, the working group was using test methodology that was suggested by the RISE coalition. And first and foremost, it was like a goodwill from the ministry, but if to take into account prioritization, we need to also allocate money for that. Also, Відновлення, recovery program is also using finances from the fund. As of 11th of October, we see that 15% of those applications were already viewed. We see that the biggest amount is 20,000, but in average it's 80,000 hryvnia of compensation. Apart from that, we have 100 housing certificates that were issued. The third line of compensation from this fund is for the damaged buildings. Generally, for fund, for the first 2 meetings, there were 272 total number of objects submitted. The total estimated cost of project is 23.5 billion hryvnia. For 2023, 11.5 billion hryvnia have been allocated for recovery project from the liquidation fund, and 9% financing of projects in 2023 from local budget and other sources. So we need to indicate that money for 2023. So for the next year, we will still need to additionally fund another part of this money. Concerning pretty significant amount of money was given to Khmelnytskyi region. It's 1.9 billion hryvnia, and there is the biggest object and is health institutions. It may be not connected with the damage of from Russia, but generally it is connected with the fact that help needs to be provided to internally displaced people and to our militaries. In Kyiv region, it is the second region. There mostly it's building houses, then Sumy region, Chernivtsi, and so on and so forth. When we are talking about types of objects, then the main thing that's of course infrastructure, houses, and other objects is even less. If we look at it in subgroups, so-called, then the biggest objects amount of objects is in multi-apartment buildings, but the biggest amount of money is now allocated to health sphere and also to water pipes. That's once again the drainage. That's once again the first and the second work group without Kakhovka. So on Kakhovka, we have separate slate in the presentation. Money are also allocated from the fund, but according to the prioritization, they are not here. The total cost is around 13 billion if to talk about Kakhovka, and only 8.5 billion allocated. What is important to mention is that housing is rebuilt not only with funds from the state budget, and it is money also go here from local budget and other programs of the state budgets. Unfortunately, due to the absence of information, it's pretty difficult to estimate the general amount of cost allocated for the programs of housing. That's why we are very cheering for Dream Up system, ecosystem for recovery, which will show us the amount of money and donors, at least partly, so we can understand what money are we talking about, what are we talking about right now. Also, the Reconstruction Agency carried out both the restoration and reconstruction of individual houses, for example, Makariv and Zaporizhzhia, and the comprehensive reconstruction of settlements. There is a certain decree resolution from the Cabinet of Ministers, the resolution of the implementation of pilot projects to restore settlements, and we have received news from the agency that there is already pretty active work in Posad-Pokrovsky in the Kherson region and the village of Yahidne in Kyiv region. It's actually very interesting, and it's interesting to see how private business is engaged as well to suggest maybe some architecture solutions. And it is extremely important that we have open tenders of this project cost documentation. Concerning Kakhovka and Suma, we have already discussed that lots of water pipelines are already there. It was 100 kilometers. It is important. And another important thing is that tender is open and this information is available. When we are talking about the hot topic of our today's workshop, budget of 2024, and we can say that domestic revenues are not much higher than they not only slightly exceed defense and security expenditures for the next year. Unfortunately, it is our conditions. The main priority, of course, is still self-defense and security because we need to win this war. All the other expenditures are financed with the help of external help. In particular, in the budget, it is written that we need to borrow 42 billion dollars, and not so much guaranteed so far, but after the decision of the European Parliament, we understand that Ukrainian facility as the instrument of Ukrainian support is pretty feasible. So we are definitely going to receive money. The question is how much, because previously the European Union has mentioned that they will allocate those money, but of budget support it's only 39 billion, and it will be allocated in equal portions. The government already asked the European side to receive 18 billion of help next year, and it's extremely important because this year we'll get almost 17. That's why, from the point of view that priority is safety and defense, the capital is really there is not much allocated for capital. Funding for reconstruction is limited. For example, this year it was 50% of the NBU's profit and confiscation of Russian assets, and it's 26 billion, 18 billion were received the previous year just from the accounts of the banks. It was easy money. We did not need to have so much work to do there. Unfortunately, next year, the NBU's profit will be around 18 billion in total. In comparison, today, this year, it was 71, around 71. So that's why we decided it was a decision to give all this profit to the state budget. Confiscation is still the only potential source of funding for the liquidation fund. And it is important to mention that this is why we need to just to have a bigger development and better work of different bodies to have financing of fund. Also, we with colleagues think that the fund can use this money. For example, if they confiscated Russian assets, for example, Belgium already mentioned that more than 1.5 billion will be given to Ukraine as help. And this source, but it is actually money from frozen assets of Russia. Our opinion is that they need to go to financing of for reconstruction and rebuilding, not as any other. Not any other directions. Road fund will be funded at the expense of balances because as it is thought now, everything else should go to the state budget. But the situation is not as critical if we talk about rebuilding, because what we see right now, we have programs in special fund of the state budget already financed by different IFI. In particular, it is programs of World Bank and European Investment Bank. For example, only in the support for the rapid recovery of Ukraine, it is 3.2 billion of hryvnia. But we need to mention that this is the number that will be much higher than it is mentioned right now, because the special fund gets money from international partners, and this is the amount that can be spent without introducing changes to the state budget. There are also other separate programs financed by other donors. For example, in September 20, by bilateral donors. For example, in September 2023, the SMU decided to locate a grant from Japan in the amount of 22 billion hryvnia to implement the emergency recovery program through a special fund of the state budget. It is understandable that this year we will not be able to spend all this money, so these are money for recovery for the next year. There are some other United 24 targeted reconstruction and rehabilitation projects. There we have some questions to transparency, and there are some questions whether these are those projects money from external donors that support Ukraine. For example, they earn they raise money for the stadium in Irpin. I understand, because Andriy Shevchenko is the ambassador of this project, but maybe it's not a priority as of now. If we are talking about reserve fund, then here we have huge caveats concerning transparency of this reserve fund right now, and today money is allocated. Project for 2024 is 44.7 billion hryvnias, but we do not know exactly what is allocated where. That's why we tried to have some such exercise. We worked with all the resolutions of the cabinet ministers of Ukraine to allocate money, but there is a problem here because it is difficult to distinguish whether the funds go to reconstruction, to this or that amalgamated communities, and it is real, whether it's really recovery or rebuilding. If this information is not available and there is no the solutions, the orders of the amalgamated communities are not made public. So that's why it would be really great to have increased transparency of the reserve fund, and those money should also be made public, as well as a project that money allocated for. It should be made public on PRIM. When we are talking about donor banks, for example, World Bank starts off financing home renovation to restore people rights and opportunities. The program is called HOPE. Total financing $232 million. Actually, it is even a little bit more. And as a result, these costs are partly already in the state budget for 2024, but actually it is not the whole budget on this project, and financing can be bigger than in this budget. Another relink program, it is restoration of critical logistic infrastructure. Here we are talking about rebuilding and restoration of roads, railways, and bridges. Once again, in the budget, we have 16 million of hryvnia, but we see that the total financing is 585 million, which is much bigger number, which is in the budget. Once again, if we effectively spend money on those programs, then we will get more money from our donors. The European Investment Bank, there is already information available. The Ministry of Recovery already has mentioned how many, Ministry of Restoration already mentioned the amount of projects. And here we have competitive selection of projects agreed with the EIB. Here we have even less transparency with the bond of liquidation. We do not see how many projects were submitted, in what spheres, who did that, and also the information concerning what exactly was supported is also not public, so there's just information about the general amount of all the projects. So that's why, as for us, since those money goes through budgets, they need to be in DREAM. Those projects partly they are already in DREAM on that version that we see on the website. The prioritization and selection procedures, in our point of view, should be similar for different funding sources. So, like for example, liquidation. Fund of the liquidation. Of course, journalists do not give the opportunity for anybody to rest, but it's very good because they really conduct such investigations that can bring better changes, cause better changes. And the important thing is those changes can happen, but we need to take into account the journalist investigations and not take into account all possible details of how reconstruction is happening. Unfortunately, the monitoring of and research investigations in the sphere of recovery and building is much more difficult if you're talking about procurement in other spheres. That's why it is extremely important here to understand the market, but we also need to increase this market. We know ourselves that our building construction market has always been in shade. There is the least number of transparency and understanding, and that's why now is this moment when we need to improve the situation on the market, but construction is now the need is much higher now than the amount of those who are ready to rebuild everything, and the state is competing here now with other organizations that can deal with reconstruction. The problems here that journalists mentioned: insufficient transparency, lack of competitive tenders, contractors, criminal proceedings, and corrupt past, overpayment for construction materials, and so fast, and so on and so forth. The reaction is very different. Sometimes the prosecutor's office launches an investigation, sometimes the Bureau of Economic Security does this, but we need to understand here, and we need to have understanding who can check it and what is the sphere of the responsibilities of the Bureau of Economic Security and everything else, not to have too many different checks and audits. Another thing that we have mentioned, it's recovery investigations when the state agency for recovery made procurement, and Nashi Hroshi mentioned that they spent more money on concrete, but Mustafa Nayem immediately reacted that they will deal with that. Almost immediately there was this response from the state agency why there was more expenses, because it was not only concrete, there are lots of other components. And I would like to also mention that it is a problem not only of the state agency for recovery. When we were talking about different NGOs, they also mentioned that they in their projects have some situations like this as well, because it's pretty difficult to agree everything in advance and to foresee all expenses. That's why the reaction of Yuri Nikolov was that they are satisfied that the state agency responded. Really, 25% of the general price, it is income and other expenses, but they will be keeping an eye on those procurements. That's why, once again, I would like to mention that those investigations and recovery, they are pretty difficult, but very useful, because they make those all those agencies to become more transparent and understandable for us. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I will stop here. Thank you, Oleksandra. Thanks a lot. Actually, for me, it is extremely important that those procedures that our Ministry of Reconstruction managed to have in the fund of the liquidation helped us from the second monitoring already have geographic split by sphere, so we can see what amount of money was spent where and how. So it gives us the opportunity to have this bird eye view. So unfortunately, it is not always possible, and we cannot look at the situation, including costs from donors. Unfortunately, here we do not have such detailed information. So DREAM really stays a priority. So everything should get in DREAM, and then we'll be able to see whether costs are spent according to priorities. And now we are moving to the next block of our today's. Oh no, I'm not moving there yet. Let's have a Q&A, short Q&A right now, because here in the chat I have the question to Oleksandra and to what has been just mentioned. Sasha, let me ask you three questions or four questions from what we see in the chat, because some questions we have already answered. So the first, it is written that there is no data in the DREAM as well. Can you mention very shortly which data do we use from DREAM and what are we still waiting to see there, and where do we get some other data that we use for this monitoring? DREAM so far is not working full-fledgedly. So far, there are several issues. DREAM is now an experiment. It is being fulfilled with information right now. Some certain algorithms are tested, which will be launched later. They promise to completely launch DREAM till the end of the year, but there is one but. Since this is the experiment that is funded through the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers, no amalgamated communities have to submit their projects in DREAM. What is in DREAM and what will be in DREAM? These are those objects that were in the fund of the liquidation, for example, because it's understandable that the government gives money, that's why they are in the DREAM. But now I think we will have another resolution that will presuppose that envisage that all the projects should be in the DREAM, and then we'll be able to analyze everything there. Thank you, Oleksandra. Second question. Actually, there are two of them in the chat. Two people ask whether foreign companies can take part in tenders and reconstruction of objects, and can we use subcontractors from abroad on competitive basis? And maybe there are some stories already published in methodological recommendations that you can share with us. Actually, procurement for recovery and for reconstruction, all those tenders, it should be public procurements. And public procurements, everybody can take part. It's Ukrainian companies and foreign companies. So that's why there are no limitations for foreign companies to enter our market, but there are some risks that they will face here. Military risk first and foremost, but there are no limitations. So basically, welcome to the club. Yes, I think that maybe technically people do not know how to work with our tenders. And Ukraine is a new country for many people, but there is just one issue. Here we can face the problem, because one thing is that when company enters, another thing when company enters with its foreign employees, we have certain limitations for hiring foreigners. We talk a lot about that, and liberalization for employing foreigners, because now in our country we have very limited amount of staff in construction spheres. That's why if company is entering with its employees, it can face some problems. Well, I think it will be really great question for one of the next monitorings to look at who are our subcontractors and whether foreign companies really can take part in our tenders, or maybe there are some stumbling blocks for them. I'm not certain that it will be the next monitoring, but one of the next monitorings, because it is a really great question. And the last thing, it's the question of what information system is used for the monitoring. I think you can just mention what sources do you use, just technically, how do we gather the information, how do we collect data? And because I do not really understand what is meant here by informational system, so maybe you can just tell what, how do you gather information. So what I have mentioned in the fund concerning liquidation fund, all documents are made public. We also monitor legislation and news. We read our journalists, and there are lots of different monitoring going on, but we really rely on DREAM, that there we will have a much bigger amount of information, but for that we need to legalize the DREAM, so then communities really have to um, give information there, and that information about some recovered objects included there as well, even if it is done through donors' money, but at least we will know about such objects. Okay, then the next question the last question from Q&A. When approximately are you going to define territories for recovery, and according to the law of Ukraine about main basics of the policy? Because so far the procedure for those winners, so-called winners, is not really understandable. If shortly we have resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers about recovery and plan of recovery, so I suggest reading those resolutions. It is mentioned specifically which territory is considered to be the territory for recovery, who actually can supply some objects there. And then there is another resolution where it is written more clearly the information about the fund of liquidation. So basically, if you have seen this map in the fund of the liquidation, objects are financed in all parts of Ukraine. So it is not only damaged and destroyed objects, it also can be objects that can be financed because of the huge amount of internally displaced people, or for example, hospitals needed to provide help for wounded. So and so on and so forth. So that's why resolution 118 can give, and another resolution, I don't remember its number, but it everything is explained there in a pretty clear way. Thank you. So then we are done with the Q&A in our first block. Maybe in the end of our event, somebody will have some new questions and we will be able to discuss them. But now I would like to move to what has been mentioned by our interviewees, conducted by Oleksandra Kobernik and Maria Tomilina. It seems to me that they have done just fantastic job. She was looking for people who are dealing with recovery in public, in civic sector, public sectors, all those activists, small NGOs, which are going to our villages and, for example, make schools out of village clubs, or fix windows in hospitals. And she asked them how everything is going on there, what challenges they face with, how do they cooperate with local government, who is financing their project, and what are their conclusions concerning of what they see right there on the field. And this summary for this interviews, for these talks, I think Maria will share the summary with us. Masha, please, the floor is yours. Yes, hello. I hope that you can see my screen. Yes. So let's start then. Let's talk about role of NGOs and charity foundations in recovery. So we have conducted. Masha, can you please speak a little bit slower? We have interpretation working. Yes, so in the framework of our project, we have conducted interviews with different international organizations and charity foundations that are dealing with the process of recovery manually, as Maria has mentioned, and they cover different spheres of activities. Among them, it's recovery of housing and private buildings, It's a repair and maintenance of shelters and schools, the same about clinics and hospitals, and engagement of youth in the process of recovery and development of volunteering. Majority of NGOs have pretty insignificant budgets for each project. It can be several dozen thousand euros, but they do not take part in capital construction because it's a pretty long-term bureaucratic process and the absence of their own specialists to work on the project. Because as I have already mentioned, they have significant limitations in their budget. But despite all of this, the effectiveness of their work is pretty high because they cover the urgent needs. So something that has to be resolved right now at this moment to rebuild regular life for people in communities and cities. At the same time, NGOs and charity funds have certain criteria for prioritization, and according to which they make decision whether they are going to tackle this or that project or not. And on the basis of our interviews, we have defined that such criteria are safety and distance from the front line. It is need from the side of the locals, so from the size of the very communities taken into account. For example, if there are needs, there is a need for hospitals and so on. It's also financial capacity of communities, because usually the preference is given to more poor communities and villages, because not everybody wants to work with them. Also, we take into account inquiries specifically from donors that allocates money, but for specific communities, we also take into account the needs of pensioners, disabled people, and so on and so forth. One of the key stages for our interviews is chapter on implementation of the projects and reporting with donors and the communities. So we have found out that majority of NGOs and charity funds have in their staff certain specialists, and they can estimate destructions, and they also can work on the documents. They can have a technical monitoring on the process of recovery. Tenders are usually conducted by their own opportunities, or they can send suggestions to potential doers of such jobs. The preference is given to subcontractors and places to incentivize local work labor market, but unfortunately it is not always very easy to find somebody, and then they engage somebody from the other regions if they have worked with them before, for example. Also, there are cases of coordination. What I mean is when there is one object, but certain different NGOs are working on this one object, and there can be even several donors that finance the different parts of this work. We have also found out that NGOs usually monitor such construction processes themselves. Very useful for us was the effectiveness of implementation of the very reconstruction. It is the experience of one charity fund that is dealing with the reconstruction of medical objects. Employees there have undergone special training in international company on the monitoring of construction, and for this they use the application. There is a survey, and this application divided into three parts. This first one is technical questions, the second is for local community, and the third one is for defining the results of this work. When we are talking about the process of reporting for donors, then we got the information that there is no certain unification concerning how it has to be done. The very approach is not universal, and report really depends on demands and wishes of a specific donor, but still it is possible to get certain patterns, certain example. Definitely there should have been report on the work done, and sometimes even with the result of survey of citizens, and also financial report where all financial issues are discussed. it was important for us to find out how these or those NGOs or charity funds communicate with citizens and concerning their making them aware and them and other stakeholders when we are talking about the stages of reconstruction or building the result that they have at this or that moment in time concerning the amount of money that they have spent or raised. And on the basis of this survey, we have found out that almost all NGOs, they do communicate using their own website or social media, mostly Facebook and Instagram. During our interviews, we have also asked which problems do they face with, and the challenges are the following. In certain cases, it is the personal interest of local government, and some communities are not ready to cooperate with NGOs and charity funds. Sometimes they provide false information concerning the scales of destruction or the amount of students in the school. Also, there is lack of sufficient coordination between a local government and donors. There are cases, and it is not even one case, there are plenty of them, when representative of one NGO or charity fund come through the invitation of the object, but it is being already recovered by somebody else. Also, it is a lack of subcontractors and qualified specialists because of internal migration and migration in general. Also, lots of men are now engaged in armed forces of Ukraine, and it, of course, influences budgets and in terms of fulfillment of projects. Another challenge is the deficit of materials and increase of cost for its logistics. Not everything is very easy to buy, and it's also competition in this between subcontractors and materials, because just donors sometimes ask to fulfill everything in specific terms, and NGOs and the charity funds just do not have enough time to choose the most optimal offer from the potential doers of such jobs. In the end of our interviews, we have asked representatives of governmental organizations and charity funds whether they plan to include their project in DREAM. They do not have unanimous position here, and the possibility depends on the donor that provides financing. Funding. The biggest stumbling block was the safety component. So not to open the information of whatever recovery is going on, and also they do not want to go through all different audits and explaining why they have spent this or that amount of money, why it is not the cheapest offer that was available on the market. At the same time, some charities mentioned that they are ready to include information about the object, but without the detailed information. And I would like here to summarize shortly what I have just mentioned, so you all can understand that still majority of government and NGOs and charity funds have pretty insignificant budgets, and the projects are not strategically important or nationally important, but still they cover the most important needs of communities and citizens. And this is recovery of clinics in villages and hospitals. It is rebuilding of shelters and schools, which let children in school already go and continue their studying. It's a recovery of private houses for those who lost it. And such projects that using of donors fund is the most effective because it gives a fast result and it covers urgent social needs. Thank you. This is all from me. Thank you, Masha. These are heroic people, actually. I have not listened to all interviews, just some of them, but I was in awe on I have mostly heard girls and what our girls and what our women do, how are they doing this, how they go around the whole Ukraine, how they find those villages where there is the biggest need and nobody is supporting and helping those citizens in those small villages. I think that one of the products of our project, one of the components will be this map of those organizations that are doing something manually in the field. So those who are helping people, those who are covering those urgent needs in different regions. And maybe this map will come in handy for somebody. For example, if some donor would like to finance recovery in this flexible way through through some kind of NGO or charity fund, or maybe somebody on places will be looking for NGO through which they will be able to repair some kind of school or hospital or kindergarten or something similar. So I think that theoretically such information can be useful. So we hope that on our portal that in several months we are planning to launch, this information will be available. If you are an NGO or a charity fund that is dealing with recovery, please contact us and we will be very happy to cooperate. And now we are moving to the other extremely interesting series of interviews. It is interviews about international experience of reconstruction and experience of monitoring of this reconstruction. So who has monitored reconstruction and recovery in what countries previously? It was Irina was talking about that. She was talking about the literature in this sphere. And today Oleksandra Kobernik will talk about how she didn't read, but she did talk with real people who shared the real experience with them in reconstruction and monitoring, and they were sharing with their challenges, problems, success. Maybe something will be interesting for us as well. Alexandra, please, the floor is yours. Yes, hello. Just a second. I just want you to see the whole slide on the screen. I hope that now you can see everything, and please let me know if you hear me well. Previous time we already discussed this topic of international experience. Today I would like to present the results of what have been discovered by us through multiple interviews of international experts. And immediately I would like to tell you that unfortunately not all stories of post-war recovery has happy ending. Most often we learn all on mistakes, and let's look at Sarajevo experience. It's Bosnia and Herzegovina, its capital, and it was the siege was there for 4 years, the longest in the history. And after the end of the war, it was unprecedented help provided to the city. It was a solidarity, international funding, and expert support. But however, all these factors altogether cannot guarantee success. Why? Because first of all, it is the absence of general strategy, how recovery of the city is seen. On the question of many donors to this city government, whether do you have strategy of recovery, donors have heard that. Of course, we do have strategy. Which one do you need? American one, Japanese one, or Arabian one? And the local government just had map with lands and they ordered that land for donors, for organizations, for constructions. And it was not written there for what kind of institutions or buildings had to be there. So they just demolished factories and built houses, but there were no hospitals, no kindergartens, no schools, no infrastructure at all. Moreover, for instance, American investors from Arizona and Texas came and they were building shopping malls, sometimes and very often even without getting all needed permission for doing that. At the same time, Japanese government tried to lobby such strategy of mobility that would encourage the export of their cars. Saudi Arabia was investing in religious institutions, mosques mostly, and Western European governments were building Catholic churches. Switzerland was financing Sarajevo recovery on the example of their landscape from the 90s. So what does it show us? That we need to strive to some level of standardization, not to have such situation that some schools are built by Norwegians according to their standards, some schools are built by Italians, and other schools are rebuilt by Japanese. Of course, there will be different areas that will demand different types of buildings, but preferably to have the main level of standardization. As we can see, orientation only for short-term benefits, financial benefits, or some kind of plans offered by donors and investors in long-term prospects can lead to brain flaws, to the absence of greenery, high level of pollution, and bad transport situation. Let's stay with Bosnia a little bit longer, and with their experience in Bosnia, there is such a proverb that you do not look in the mouth of a gifted horse, but based on the results of the interview, this approach is not right. In Sarajevo, during the war, people had to heat their buildings somehow in winter, and that's why they cut lots of old buildings, lots of old trees that were in parks. And at the end of the war, Marseille, French city, gave Sarajevo lots of chestnut trees, and they heard lots of course, gratitude words, but they did not take into consideration the peculiarities of local climate. We know that we have lots of such trees in Ukraine, but they lose their leaves at the end of November, but in October, and in November there is already 1 meter of snow in Sarajevo, and because of that, those trees fell and they broke tram rails and certain electricity connections. Some other mayors of Balkan cities mentioned that when donor comes to them with huge portfolio of investments or lots of money for recovery, they cannot say no, because who's going to say no to 4 million of euros? But it is needed that the local government and we as ourselves understand what do we need to rebuild and what do we expect from such donors. We need to have our own estimation criteria of effectiveness, and we need to conduct critical analysis of projects. So what do we need to know? We need to strive to change this donor-recipient relations and to make this partnership relations. It can encourage experience exchange. For example, now Sarajevo has memorandum with cooperation with Zurich, and they learn city planning, and Zurich learns military experience. Also, it is investment in future development. So it is not long-term relations when some is higher, some is lower, but it is long-term relations of equals. Also, civic society should be active. Donors are not always able to self-organize themselves, and there are some projects when donors and international investors will not want to see government, but they can still allow presence of civic society as some kind of a bridge, a dialogue building component. Also, civic society can advocate contextualization. That's what we have mentioned, that for different territories in Ukraine, we need to take into account different climate, and it has to be reflected on different types of construction. Another component is that this course for recovery should be flexible. Due to public monitoring, independent experts will come and they will see that, for example, school is built with poor materials, with bad materials, and there is no opportunity to immediately stop this project and either to change procurement or different materials, and there is no need to wait till the end of this project. Also, it can be change of priorities, or, for example, it can happen that some donors will have very rigid demands, very strict demands, and they will say that this amount of money can be allocated only for this project, only on this location, and then, of course, it will not make possible this space for maneuver. We also have, we discussed previous time reconstruction in Afghanistan, and there was this agency called SIGAR, Special General Inspector on Afghanistan Recovery. They also had their own so-called database where they had subcontractors. It was some kind of blacklist. Who, for example, were involved in corruption, or they were using money to different reasons, or just they were not competent enough. And last very important lesson, international lesson, is in the fact that information should be accessible and simple. SIGAR in Afghanistan, they of course were doing very quality reports, but they had their own disadvantages concerning their monitoring of recovery. First of all, they were very technical. Second of all, they were published in Washington. And third of all, they were published only in English. It all made this information absolutely not accessible for the Afghans. And that's why there were those last years of active support for the EU to Afghanistan. And then in Kabul, they published local newspapers that provided information and not so technical words about corruption cases on places. The public society immediately became engaged, involved, and it made government react as well for this recovery to happen according to all the rules. It seems to me that of course, it's understandable that every country has different targets for recovery. For us, main conclusions are that our main aim should be Euro integration for this recovery. We all have witnessed building of new roads, but we had no guarantees of safety, and they were bombed. Or, for example, roads that costs are allocated, they cannot be built because of corruption risks. Euro integration will help us to fight all of that. What also gives me wings is that some experts have mentioned that if Ukrainian reconstruction is successful, we will be some kind of a role model for other countries that after us will want to get in the EU. For this, we need to work very closely with the European institutions, with the delegation and the budget committee of the European Parliament, Euro Commission, and the European Court of Auditors. The civic society and NGOs should be actively engaged and responsible, because we create our own program. And as it has been shown in international experience, the phase that only recovery and rebuilding will give people opportunities is wrong, because a real improvement of life happens when every person takes part in this process and has this sense of responsibility. Of course, good start and speed is important as well. Speed is important because people have needs. For example, they cannot return to their destroyed homes, and they try to live in very difficult situations. In Balkans, they managed to do this reconstruction in a pretty fast terms, and it inspires us as well. At the beginning of the recovery, donors have huge level of support. That's why financial resources should come pretty fast. There is this pressure on government, and population should be actively involved as well. So good start will mean good end and good result. So with this monthly monitorings, I think we are able to achieve this. Ukrainians have shown high results, and this their wish for coordination and using transparent mechanisms for tenders. And we need to keep up this pace, because as recovery of Germany and Japan have shown, capable institutions can guarantee long-term effectiveness and results. And to summarize, of course, we need long-term planning as well, because we need to engage private investments, since money, the costs of the state and reparations are not enough to cover all our needs for reconstruction, even if we take all frozen Russian assets. So that's why these are four main pillars for our recovery. And I think our monthly monitoring will help with that. Thank you, Oleksandra. Thanks a lot. We actually have two very interesting, really great topics. Oleksandra Betliy and Oleksandra Kobernik were talking about priorities that we do not, we need to build something that is needed in the city here and now, and we really hope that this prioritization in Ukraine will happen, that this methodology will be published, developed, discussed with the public society, and everything will be achieved. And actually, it was my first question to our next guest, to Mr. Mingareli. He's the ex-ambassador of the EU to Ukraine in 2016-2019, and also director of the European Agency on Reconstruction. So I think that Mr. Mingareli has really great understanding on how those priorities can be defined, and maybe he can share this information with us.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this very interesting discussion. It's really a pleasure for me to be a few minutes with you. As you have all mentioned during your interventions, the needs are immense in Ukraine as regards the recovery and reconstruction process. And therefore, we all know that it will not be possible to cover all these needs from the start, from the beginning. Hence, the need to set each year priority sectors and a clear regional sequencing as well. As regards the regional sequencing, it's clear that the devastation of social and economic infrastructure has been far worse in eastern Ukraine than in other regions. And therefore, I believe that during the first 2 to 3 years, it would be important to focus our reconstruction efforts on a few oblasts, namely the oblast of Sumy, Kharkiv, Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. These are, in my view, the territories on which, during the first 2 to 3 years, we should focus most of our efforts. As regards the priority sectors, the main objective of all stakeholders, and especially of people like you, should be to give the 15 million people who left their homes, 8 million refugees in Western Europe and 7 million IDPs in Western Ukraine, to give these 15 million people an incentive to return to their home. And for that, there are a few activities that have to be undertaken immediately, not in 1 or 2 years' time, but immediately. First one, as we all know, about 1/3 of the territory of your country is contaminated with landmines and unexploded ordnances. And this should be the first priority, to focus a lot of our efforts on clearing the landmines and the unexploded ordnances. If we don't do that, it will be a disaster. That's what I have been living 20 years ago in Kosovo, in North Macedonia, where we started rebuilding some infrastructure without paying enough attention to the landmines in these countries. And in your countries, the situation is far worse than in the Western Balkans. And therefore, I really believe that we should never forget that. Before sending back people to territories in eastern Ukraine, we should clear the landmine and the unexploded ordnances. This is the first point. The second point, as many of you have already said, the Russians have committed an ecocide in your country. They have really created unbelievable environmental disasters. And therefore, it will be important as soon as possible to work to decontaminate the land, the soil, and the air. And I just give you a few examples. Between Kharkiv and Berdyansk in the south, since 2014, the Russians have destroyed I don't know how many chemical and steel factories. That I have seen already. And it's clear that around these factories which have been destroyed, you have everywhere asbestos. If you want people to get back to these areas, you have to handle this environmental damage immediately. A second example in terms of environmental disaster. In all areas where you have coal mines and iron ore mines, namely between Lugansk and Donetsk for the coal mines and around Kryvyi Rih for the iron ore mines, you need to pump water in the galleries constantly, even when the mines are no longer exploited. If you don't pump the water in the galleries, you have infiltration of contaminated water in the underground water, and you have no more drinking water in these areas. Since 2014, in most areas between Lugansk and Donetsk, water has not been pumped. And therefore, as soon as it is possible to accede to these areas, the pumping of water in the coal and iron ore mines should be a priority. Otherwise, it will be no longer possible for people to live there. Third priority. You have today in Ukraine, in my view, a traumatized population. In some areas, people have been for now 9 years constantly under bomb, under missiles, and therefore it's clear that these people need psychological and psychosocial support as quickly as possible. We should remember that reconstruction and recovery of a country is not just about physical reconstruction. You have millions of people in Ukraine, and you know this better than I do, who need to rebuild their lives. And therefore, it is very important, once again, to focus on this population who have been traumatized for 9 years now, and especially in the areas which have been at one point occupied by the Russian aggressors. Then, obviously, if you want people to get back, you have to take care to the most urgent civilian infrastructure, which means water supply, power generation and distribution, electricity, healthcare facilities, and schools. These are the basic things which should be focused on during the first 3 years of the reconstruction process. And then later on, in my view, this is not the top priority, but we should give this in mind. If we want people to get back, we want to offer them a job. And for then, obviously, we have to create a business environment which is favorable, which is attractive to get the necessary domestic and foreign investors to get back in this region of eastern Ukraine. This should be, in my view, the way to set the priorities. In parallel, we should keep in mind that it is necessary to resume the modernization process of Ukraine. You have been doing fantastic things between 2014 and 2022 in terms of political and economic reform. You should be supported to resume the modernization process as quickly as possible. And you should keep in mind that you will be, I hope, in a few weeks' time, starting the EU accession process. And therefore, every time that you rebuild or modernize the sector, you should keep in mind that you have to align your legislation with the EU one. You have to take over constantly the acquis communautaire in the EU accession process. This is, in 2 words, how I can describe the priority for the next few months.
Thank you very much for this description and for this very Actually, great answer. Дуже дякую за таку гарну розмову.
Thank you for such a great discussion and answers. I think that we will even try to publish it separately of what you have just mentioned, because I think it is extremely interesting and important to, so all our other stakeholders can read or hear this, apart from those who are here with us today. I have one more topic I wanted to talk with you today. It is actually this process of observation, of recovery, spending money, and on the basis of your experience, it can be monitoring from the side of the state or some independent bodies, for instance, some inspectors for recovery, as I have read in American requirements, or it can be civic society. So it can be it can be used as kind of watchdogs as well. So what type of monitoring is the most effective from your point of view, and what was effective and what was not effective on Balkans when you were dealing with this issue?
I believe that you have to use both kind of entities you have just mentioned. Namely, you have on one side a number of specialized institutions, such as the Accounting Chamber of Ukraine or the State Audit Service. You should mobilize this institution, but you should as well make sure that your exceptional civil society organization get a full and constant access to all data related to the recovery and reconstruction process. Regarding the specialized institution, I will mention just two of them, the Accounting Chamber of Ukraine and the State Audit Service. You have basically, first of all, to put in place the appropriate legislative framework to ensure that these two institutions have the necessary means to carry out their job, which means that you have to strengthen the independence and the professionalism of the accounting chamber and the state audit service. This is the first point. The second point, you have to ensure that there will be a transparent and independent selection of the members of the board of the Accounting Chamber of Ukraine. This is obviously important because independence is of the essence. Then you have to strengthen the mandate of the Accounting Chamber of Ukraine to allow this institution to carry out audit of the local government bodies, of the state-owned companies, and of all public procurement activities. This is important. So, in my view, you should do everything possible to strengthen the capacity of these two institutions, the Accounting Chamber of Commerce and the State Audit Service. This is one element. Second element, you have in Ukraine, everybody knows that, at least those who know a bit your country, a fantastic civil society. And you have everywhere on the territory of your country, NGOs and associations which could perform a very, very important role in monitoring all phases of the reconstruction process, from project identification to ex post evaluation. And therefore, I believe that you should mobilize all of these people and all these entities. You have as well in Ukraine, and it is a chance, the digital procurement system Prozoro, which was put in place when I was in your country. It was in 2016 or 2017. And this is something very important. And in my view, you should use as much as you can the Prozoro digital system. You have as well now, it has been put in place in the last few weeks by your restoration agency, the DREAM ecosystem. This is again a very interesting instrument that you could use as much as you can. And I will stop there because I am already too long. it's clear that open data is of the essence for efficient monitoring, and therefore the government of your country should ensure full access to the unified state register. This is very important. We have to make sure that all NGOs and all, by the way, all donors can access to this register to monitor on a constant basis the implementation of the reconstruction process.
Thank you so much. Дуже дякую, пане Мінгарелі, за
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mingareli, for participation in our today event. And thank you that you have been a great friend of Ukraine, and now you're talking to us about your views. We have 15 minutes left, and I suggest that we move to Q&A session. I see already in the chat 3 nice questions. The first one I actually will address to Oleksandra Betliy. By the way, Oleksandra, maybe you want to react about capacity of accounting chamber of Ukraine, if you have such a wish. But if not, then I will move to the question, a technical question from Anthony Levitas, whether NGOs are authors of project offers, or it's hromadas, communities, and whether there is approval of hromadas, of communities, before they get financing. Sasha, you can choose what do you want to talk first, and the second thing concerning accounting of a chamber of accounting chamber. Of course, we need reforms. Here it is already a draft law on accounting chamber of Ukraine, and also we now have we try to have resolutions in other reforms of other entities, and lots of money will be provided for recovery, and generally if we have a certain normal approach to monitoring and control. But without it, we cannot hope that somebody can trust us. Concerning projects, if we are talking about a project that are funded from budget, then these projects are for self-government. So those projects that Maria Tomilina talked about, based on the interviews of different NGOs, there we have different approaches. Donors can come with projects, so they say who they can give money to. So usually these organizations that have experience in recovery, and donor can say that I have such a budget, or for example, it can be some competition procedure, some kind of tender, and we want to build schools or health care institutions. After that, NGOs or a charity fund can choose donors, but as Maria has mentioned, it is needed, the cooperation with hromadas, with communities is needed, because sometimes there were cases when money costs were available, there was readiness to build some objects, but there was no readiness from the side of local self-governance, and sometimes the process is vice versa. A community comes to NGO, some kind of NGO, and they say that we need help of donors, because the fund of liquidation, it's for huge objects. It is not for example, fixing windows or doors. It is huge object, and there are cases when shelter has to be provided, or it needs to be changed, or there are cases when there are broken windows, and it is faster to work through the funds. But the role of local governance is very important here. They need to want to do this, and I just want to say that NGO Smilivy, as Alona has mentioned, they will have a special platform dedicated to such small projects that that might need some funding. And because we need that sometimes donors have certain amount of money that they want to spend, but they don't know where they need to go, and coordination between donors somehow now is not always the best. Thank you, Oleksandra. The next question I will put on the hat of analytic now and take off the hat of the moderator, and then maybe some of my colleagues would like to answer that. When we're talking about the integration to the EU, most of help will come through structural funds. The access to these funds demand huge volume of planning, and the payments are done only after the awards. Maybe somebody can talk about how Ukraine is trying to build this planning capacity at the national, regional, and local levels. So it's not even head of analytics, but head of the deputy head of Center for Economic Strategy. There are lots of projects on all levels of NGOs on strengthening such capacities and places. People go to some European cities, they undergo trainings and so on and so forth. But all of this, it is absolutely not enough, because we need to involve new people that can they have a good command of English language, that understand donor procedure, can read financial documents. Very often it's a problem to read financial documents in English, or donors demand. It can be like some kind of physics or mathematics for somebody. So that's why it is very important to build this capacity. One of such issues is reform of remuneration, of compensation for public officials, because they earn really a small amount of money, and it is very important to understand for everybody, and first and foremost for donors who are now funding part of Ukrainian budget, that without reforms of compensation for public officials, public servants, it will be very difficult to build this capacity, especially a capacity that needs to integrate 36 or 37 million of people to the European Union, and it's 34 there is lots of EU acquis, so the question of capacity, the issue of capacity is very acute, and we hope that it will be solved. And not only when we talk about reconstruction, but Euro integration. Yes, Oleksandra, please. Shortly, I would like to add about one very important moment when we are talking about plans. Ukraine is different from all other countries that we were talking about, in the fact that we have huge territory, and actually we will need to rebuild a lot and recover. The process of recovery and reconstruction has already started, but the war is still ongoing, and that's very hot stages of war. That's why we need to understand that in the future we'll really need it's very difficult now to plan anything, because as I have mentioned today, the general losses of infrastructure for more than a little bit more than 600 days of war is $151 billion, and only Kakhovka is estimated as $14 billion. So that's why to plan recovery or reconstruction is very early, even now and today. Of course, there are some discussions going on about capacity, but this is something that I want all of us to realize, that we are in this unique bad situation. It has never been like this in other countries, and we need to take this into account when we are talking about some projects for recovery and plans for recovery, because we don't know what we will look like in the future. Yes, about planning, I know that we already have a strategy for development for Mariupol, but some resources, money was spent on that, and of course it makes those Mariupol citizens who are still living there feel better and it inspires them. But in what conditions this plan will be fulfilled and what will we have from the city at this moment is not understandable at all. And frankly speaking, these are such exercises that are directed to communication and some kind of image solution, communication issues, and not exercises that really in the future can have chances to be implemented, because we do not know what the situation will look like. Right now, it is absolutely not clear, unfortunately, and that's true. And one more question. I don't know actually who do I need to ask this. Maybe some of the colleagues would like to be volunteers. Can any of the speakers say something about the role of the new regional offices for international cooperation in the Ukrainian region? Do they fulfill the role of being an institution which brings together international partners and specific communities with particular needs? Frankly speaking, I haven't heard about anything like this. I know that in the office of ULEAD, they have such programs. Maybe they will have roles of such coordination centers, because such offices of ULEAD, they increased regional capacity in many directions. Maybe it's about that, but we will look for such information. Yes, actually, despite the fact that in the civic society, we deal a lot with recovery, reconstruction, international cooperation, I also have not heard about such offices. Maybe if you know anything about it, then as a feedback, you can tell them that they need to strengthen their communication component. So I believe that's so. Oh, okay. These are offices. These are offices which are not in Ukraine. Maybe it is about teams of Agency of Regional Development. Maybe. Let's table this question for now. Okay, I see regional offices of international cooperation. Thank you for this link. We will try to look deeper in that, and if we can say anything about that, we can publish. Okay, there are no open questions. 3 minutes till the end of our event. Thanks a lot. I would like to remind you that today's presentation will be published on the websites of our organizations and on Facebook, and presentation is expanded in comparison with what you have seen, because we just didn't show huge long lists and tables on the screen or some other things that we have had from previous monitorings. That's why in PDF there is more information available than you have seen today. Please, you can download that if you're interested. The results of interviews conducted by Oleksandra and Maria will be published separately. Also on the pages of the project, you are able to look at it in more detailed way. And as our experts have mentioned, I think that it will be interesting. Please follow our announcements and the news of the projects on Facebook pages. Stay with us. Thanks a lot. Donate on Armed Forces